Waitress leans to the Mafia boss and whispers, "Don't look back. Just pay and go." He pulls her close, his eyes narrowing as he scans the elegant dining room of Rosetta's, Chicago's most exclusive Italian restaurant. Her trembling fingers barely maintain their grip on the leather check presenter as she feels his breath on her neck. Her name was April, a 21-year-old art student working nights to pay for school, and until this moment, she'd managed to remain invisible in the background of Chicago's dangerous underworld that occasionally graced the restaurant's private rooms. But tonight, something had changed when she spotted the men in dark suits entering through the kitchen. The young man holding her wrist was simply known as Mr. Knight to the staff, a 27-year-old who commanded respect despite his age, always requesting the corner table with the view of both entrances. His grip tightened as he leaned in, his voice barely audible as his security detail shifted nervously nearby. "What exactly did you see?" he asked, his calm tone belying the dangerous edge underneath, his thumb tracing circles on her wrist as if they were lovers sharing secrets rather than strangers in a deadly situation. April felt her world tilting on its axis as her simple warning threatened to pull her into something far beyond her depth. The restaurant's ambient noise seemed to fade as April forced herself to maintain eye contact, knowing that looking toward the kitchen might betray the men now positioning themselves near the bar. "3 men came through the back entrance asking about you. They don't work here, and they're carrying weapons under their jackets. Mr. Knight released her wrist slowly, placing several $100 bills in the check presenter, before standing with deliberate casualness, his movements calculated as he adjusted his tailored suit. His security team tensed, hands moving subtly toward concealed weapons as they awaited his command. "You've just made yourself a problem, April," he said, glancing at her name tag with a half smile that didn't reach his eyes, then sliding his hand to the small of her back. "And now you're coming with me because you've also made yourself my responsibility." Before April could protest, an explosion of shattering glass erupted from the bar area, sending patrons screaming and diving for cover as the first shots rang out across the dining room. In one fluid motion, Knight pulled her down beneath the heavy oak table as bullets splintered the wood above them. "Stay close," he commanded, his body shielding hers as his security team returned fire, creating a chaotic symphony of gunshots and screams that would forever mark the end of April's ordinary life. The pristine white tablecloth above them began to bloom with red as someone's wineglass toppled in the chaos. Knight's mouth was at her ear again, his voice steady despite the mayhem erupting around them. "When I move, you move. Understand?" he asked, his arm tight around her waist as he calculated their path to the kitchen's service exit. April nodded mutely, adrenaline flooding her system as she realized her simple act of warning this dangerous man had irrevocably altered her future in ways she couldn't yet comprehend. There would be no returning to her small apartment tonight, or perhaps ever again. Knight counted down from 3 with his fingers, before suddenly pulling her up and through the chaos, his body constantly positioned between her and the gunfire as they weaved through overturned tables and panicked patrons. His security team created a moving barrier around them, efficiently eliminating threats as they advanced. The cold night air hit April's face as Knight shoved her into the back seat of a waiting black SUV, sliding in beside her as doors slammed and the vehicle lurched into motion. She watched through the tinted windows as Rosetta's, her workplace of 3 years, faded into the distance, emergency lights already reflecting off its facade. "You have 2 choices," Knight said, his breathing now slightly labored as he applied pressure to a graze wound on his arm that April hadn't noticed in the chaos. "Disappear forever from everything you've ever known, or come with me and learn to survive in my world." April stared at him, the reality of her situation crashing down as the adrenaline began to ebb. "Why would you give me any choice at all?" she asked, her voice steadier than she felt as Chicago's skyline blurred outside the window, taking her past invisible boundaries into territories controlled by men like the one beside her. Knight's phone buzzed with incoming information about the attack, but his eyes remained locked on hers, assessing and calculating in the dim light of the vehicle. "Because loyalty given freely is worth 10 times more than loyalty taken by force, and you just proved yours without even knowing my real name." April watched as he pulled out a handkerchief and wiped a spatter of blood from her cheek with surprising gentleness, his touch a stark contrast to the violence they'd just escaped. "My name is Alec Knight, and you just saved my life. Welcome to the family business, April." The family business, as it turned out, was the Knight Crime Syndicate, one of Chicago's oldest and most powerful organizations that controlled everything from high-end real estate to the city's intricate web of political influence. April learned this as the SUV pulled through heavily guarded gates toward a lakeside mansion that looked more like a fortress. Security personnel with subtle earpieces and concealed weapons patrolled the perimeter as April was ushered through marble hallways to a study where an elderly man sat behind an imposing desk. His resemblance to Alec was unmistakable, though his eyes carried decades more of calculated violence. "So this is the waitress," the old man said, his assessment cutting through April like a physical touch as he gestured to a chair without bothering to introduce himself. "Tell me exactly what you saw tonight, every detail, and remember that your future depends on the truth of your words." April recounted the events with remarkable clarity, describing the men who had entered through the kitchen, their positions, their movements, even the way they'd checked their weapons before approaching the dining room. She noted the surprise on both men's faces as she revealed her attention to detail. "I was studying to be an artist before tonight," April explained when questioned about her observational skills, her hands folded tightly in her lap to hide their trembling. "You learn to notice everything when you're trying to capture it on paper. It becomes second nature." The old man, Don Knight, as April would later learn, exchanged a long look with his son before nodding once, a decision made in that silent communication that would alter the course of April's existence. "Get her cleaned up and settled in the East Wing, Alec. We'll discuss her role tomorrow." Hours later, dressed in borrowed clothes that fit too well to be coincidental, April stood on a balcony overlooking Lake Michigan, trying to process the surreal turn her life had taken. The soft click of the door behind her announced Alec's presence before his footsteps did. "They were Pirelli men," he said without preamble, joining her at the railing with 2 glasses of amber liquid, handing one to her as if they were old friends rather than captor and captive. "They've been trying to take our territory for months. Tonight was their boldest move yet." April accepted the glass but didn't drink, studying Alec's profile in the moonlight instead, noting the hardness that hadn't been there in the restaurant when he was playing the role of wealthy patron. "Why keep me alive when I'm a liability?" she asked directly, her artist's instinct for truth overriding her fear. Alec's laugh lacked humor as he swirled the liquid in his glass, ice clinking softly in the quiet night. "Because you're not just a liability, April. You're an asset with perfect recall, observational skills, and the ability to blend into environments where my usual people can't go unnoticed." The realization dawned on April with chilling clarity. She wasn't being protected as an innocent bystander, but was being evaluated as a potential tool in their arsenal. "You want to use me as some kind of spy," she stated rather than asked, her voice hollow as she finally took a sip of the burning liquid. "I want to give you a choice," Alec corrected, turning to face her fully, his expression serious in the dim light. "Work with us. Be protected and compensated beyond anything your art degree would ever provide, or we help you disappear with a new identity. But you can never return to your old life either way." April leaned against the railing, feeling the cool metal against her palms as she considered the crossroads before her, safety in exile, or danger in proximity to this man whose very existence seemed to attract violence. "And if I choose to stay?" she asked cautiously. "What exactly would my role be?" Alec stepped closer, his presence overwhelming in the confined space of the balcony as he studied her with new interest. "You would be my eyes and ears in places where I need them most, starting with finding the person inside my organization who told the Pirellis where I would be dining tonight." The weight of his words hung between them, heavy with implication. He was offering her not just a role, but his trust, a rare commodity in his world. "Why would you trust me with something so important when you barely know me?" April questioned, unable to hide her skepticism. "Because trust has to start somewhere," Alec replied simply, finishing his drink before setting the glass on the stone railing. "And you've already proven yourself more trustworthy than some people I've known my entire life by warning me tonight instead of looking the other way." April's training began the next morning, a crash course in the Knight family's operations, territories, and enemies, delivered by Alec himself in his father's study. Maps of Chicago covered the walls, territories clearly marked in different colors, the city divided like a medieval kingdom among warring nobles. The Pirellis control the west side, but they've been pushing boundaries since the old man died, and his son Paul took over, Alec explained, his finger tracing red boundaries that seemed to creep eastward with each new mark. "He's ambitious but reckless. Last night proved that." April absorbed the information with the same focus she once gave her art professors, memorizing faces, names, and connections as Alec revealed the complex web of alliances and rivalries that governed Chicago's underworld. Her artist's memory proved invaluable as she connected pieces into a comprehensive picture. By the third day, April found herself accompanying Alec to a night-owned nightclub, dressed in clothes selected to make her both noticeable and forgettable, attractive enough to blend with the high-end clientele, but not distinctive enough to be remembered specifically. The perfect observer hiding in plain sight. "Watch my men," Alec instructed, as they sat in a private booth overlooking the main floor, his arm draped casually across her shoulders to maintain their cover as a couple. "Tell me if any of them speak to people they shouldn't or access areas they have no business entering." April sipped her champagne slowly, her eyes constantly moving across the crowded space as she cataloged the movements of Alec's security team and staff, noting patterns and deviations with the same precision she once used to capture light and shadow on canvas. The weight of Alec's arm felt both protective and possessive. Hours passed in the pulsing darkness of the club. April's observations whispered directly into Alec's ear, her lips close enough to appear intimate, while delivering crucial intelligence about a bartender who kept disappearing into the back office between serving VIP clients. Alec's eyes darkened at each new piece of information. "We have what we need," he finally said, his hand moving to the small of her back as he guided her toward a private exit, his phone already in hand as he issued quiet commands to his security team. April felt the shift in the atmosphere. The hunter had identified his prey. The ride back to the night estate was tense with unspoken plans, Alec's phone buzzing constantly with updates until he finally turned to April with grim satisfaction. The bartender had a burner phone hidden in his locker with Paul Pirelli's private number as the only contact. "You found our leak." April should have felt relief at her successful mission, but instead, a cold dread settled in her stomach as she realized what would happen to the bartender, a man whose name she didn't even know, whose fate she had sealed with her careful observations. "What will happen to him?" she asked, already knowing the answer. Alec's expression revealed nothing as he pocketed his phone, his voice matter-of-fact as Chicago's lights reflected off the car windows. "He'll be questioned thoroughly about what information he's passed to the Pirellis, and then he'll face the consequences of betraying the family that protected and paid him." The clinical detachment in his voice sent a shiver through April, a stark reminder that despite his charm and the undeniable attraction building between them, Alec Knight was first and foremost a man who had been raised to lead a criminal empire. Mercy was a luxury rarely afforded in his world. "Does it bother you?" Alec asked suddenly, studying her reaction with careful intensity, his hand reaching across the seat to take hers in a gesture that felt both comforting and calculating. "The reality of what we do to survive in this business. Does it make you regret your choice to stay?" April looked down at their intertwined fingers, considering her answer carefully as the car turned through the gates of the night estate, bringing her deeper into a world she was only beginning to understand. "What bothers me is how quickly I'm adapting to it all," she admitted quietly, meeting his gaze with newfound resolve. Alec's smile was small but genuine, the first real one April had seen from him, as he lifted her hand to his lips in a gesture that seemed both victoriously satisfied and genuinely tender. "That's how I knew you belonged here, April. You're a survivor, just like me." 3 weeks into her new life, April found herself alone in the night estate's east wing, sketching the Chicago skyline from memory, while contemplating how swiftly her moral boundaries had shifted. The artist who once worried about affording paint supplies, now worried about the lives her observations might end. A soft knock at her door revealed Alec, his usual security detail conspicuously absent, as he entered her space with an ease that suggested he considered the entire property, including her rooms, his domain. "We have a problem that requires your particular talents," he announced, dropping a thick file on her sketching table. Inside were surveillance photos of Rosetta's restaurant, now reopened after the shooting, but with subtle security enhancements that April immediately identified with her trained eye. The familiar setting sent an unexpected wave of homesickness through her for the simple life she'd left behind. "Paul Pirelli is requesting a meeting on neutral ground. Rosetta's," Alec explained, his fingers brushing against hers as he pointed to specific images in the file. "He claims he wants to negotiate territory boundaries, but my instincts tell me it's a trap designed to finish what they started that night." April studied the photos with professional detachment, noting the new staff members whose postures suggested military or security training despite their waiter uniforms. "They've positioned people throughout the restaurant. These 3 are definitely armed," she observed, circling faces with her pencil. Alec watched her work with undisguised admiration, leaning against her desk close enough that she could smell his cologne, an expensive blend that she'd come to associate with both danger and protection. "This is why I need you there when I meet him tomorrow night," he said, his voice dropping to a more intimate register. April's head snapped up, genuine alarm crossing her features before she could mask it. "You can't be serious. They nearly killed you last time, and now you want to walk voluntarily into what's obviously a setup?" The concern in her voice surprised them both with its intensity. Alec's smile held no humor as he straightened, hands sliding into his pockets in a deceptively casual stance. "That's exactly why I'm going, to show them that no one dictates terms to a knight," he stated with the absolute certainty of someone raised to believe in his own invincibility. "And my role in this suicide mission?" April asked, setting down her pencil with deliberate control to hide the trembling in her fingers. The thought of returning to Rosetta's filled her with conflicting emotions. Nostalgia tangled with terror, the familiar setting now irrevocably altered by violence. Alec moved behind her chair, his hands resting on her shoulders in a gesture that could be interpreted as either comforting or controlling, perhaps both. "You'll return as a waitress for one night, my inside person watching for signals among their staff while I conduct business with Paul." The weight of his hands felt heavier than their physical presence, as April absorbed the implication. Her knowledge of Rosetta's layout and staff made her uniquely qualified for this role, but it also made her infinitely more vulnerable if recognized. "What if someone remembers me from that night?" she questioned, voicing only one of her many concerns. Alec's thumbs traced small circles at the base of her neck, the gentle motion at odds with the dangerous request he'd just made. "My security team will be positioned throughout the restaurant, and you'll be wearing this," he explained, placing a delicate gold necklace on the table before her. Upon closer inspection, April realized it contained a miniature panic button disguised as a pendant. Pressing it would signal Alec's security team instantly if she detected trouble. The elegant design suggested this wasn't the first time such a device had been used by someone under night protection. "I need someone I can trust absolutely," Alec said quietly, his hands still resting on her shoulders as he leaned down, his breath warm against her ear. "Someone whose loyalty is to me personally, not just to the Knight family business or payroll. And that person is you, April." The sincerity in his voice was more persuasive than any command could have been, and April found herself nodding despite her reservations, already mentally preparing for her return to the place where her life had irrevocably changed. "Tomorrow night, then," she agreed, sealing her fate with those simple words. Rosetta's gleamed under crystal chandeliers as April moved efficiently between tables, her waitress uniform both a disguise and a reminder of her former life. Every face was catalogued, every movement analyzed as she maintained her cover while monitoring the private dining room where Alec and Paul Pirelli sat surrounded by their respective security details. Through the partially open door, she caught glimpses of the tense negotiation. Paul, a man whose handsome features couldn't disguise the cruelty in his eyes, gesturing expansively while Alec maintained the controlled poise that April had come to recognize as his most dangerous state. The air felt charged with potential violence. "Another bottle of the Brunello for the private room," the manager instructed April, unaware of her true purpose as she nodded and headed toward the wine cellar. The basement location provided temporary relief from her performance, allowing her a moment to check her communication device hidden in her apron. The cellar door closed behind her with an ominous click that immediately triggered April's senses. It should have remained partially open on its hydraulic hinge. Before she could react, a hand clamped over her mouth, while another secured her arms, a familiar voice whispering against her ear. "Hello, April. We missed you upstairs." It was Jonah, Rosetta's former head bartender whom April had once considered a friend during her years working at the restaurant. "The Pirellis are paying good money to find out why a simple waitress is so valuable to Alec Knight," he hissed, dragging her deeper into the wine cellar's shadowy corners. April's training with Alec's security team kicked in instinctively. She went limp, throwing off Jonah's balance before driving her elbow hard into his solar plexus and stomping her heel onto his instep. His grip loosened enough for her to reach the panic button at her neck, pressing it firmly as she fought for freedom. Upstairs, Alec's phone vibrated with the alert, as Paul Pirelli leaned forward with a predatory smile. "Your waitress seems to have discovered our little surprise in the cellar," he commented casually, signaling to his men positioned around the dining room. "She must be special to warrant such protection." Alec's expression remained impassive, though April would have recognized the dangerous gleam in his eyes as he stood unhurriedly, buttoning his suit jacket with deliberate precision. "Special enough that taking her was the last mistake you'll ever make, Paul," he stated with quiet certainty before chaos erupted throughout the restaurant. In the cellar, April fought with desperate determination, her weeks of defensive training proving effective as she maintained distance between herself and Jonah, who had drawn a knife from his boot. "Nothing personal, April," he grunted, lunging forward as she dodged between wine racks. "But business is business." The cellar door burst open as two of Alec's security team descended the stairs, weapons drawn. The ensuing gunfire deafened April as she ducked behind a concrete pillar, wine bottles shattering around her as bullets found less resilient targets. The rich Brunello mixed with darker fluids on the stone floor. When strong arms finally pulled her from her hiding place, April found herself crushed against Alec's chest, his heartbeat racing beneath her cheek, despite his outwardly calm demeanor. "Are you hurt?" he demanded, his hands moving over her with urgent concern, searching for injuries as his security team secured the perimeter. "I'm okay," April managed, though her voice shook with the aftermath of adrenaline as she registered the bodies on the cellar floor, Jonah among them, his betrayal punished with finality. The sight should have horrified her, but instead, she felt only relief that Alec had reached her in time. Their escape from Rosetta's happened in a blur of movement, emergency vehicles approaching as night security escorted them through a service entrance to waiting vehicles. April found herself once again in the back of Alec's SUV, history repeating itself with one significant difference. This time, Alec held her hand as if afraid she might disappear. "You were right," he admitted as Chicago streaked past the tinted windows, his thumb tracing circles on her palm, in what April now recognized as his unconscious habit when processing complicated emotions. "It was a trap, but not the one I expected. They weren't after me tonight. They were after you." April's confusion must have shown on her face as Alec continued, his voice tight with controlled anger. "Paul somehow learned about your observational skills, your memory. He wants to use you exactly as I have been, but without the choice I gave you." The possessive edge in his tone revealed more than his words. The night estate transformed into a fortress overnight. Additional security personnel patrolling the grounds, surveillance equipment upgraded, and April's status visibly elevated, as Alec insisted she remain within his direct sight. The failed ambush at Rosetta's had escalated the conflict beyond territory disputes into something deeply personal. "The Pirellis have crossed a line," Dawn Knight declared during a family meeting where April was surprisingly included, seated at Alec's right hand like a consort rather than an employee. "They targeted someone under our protection, someone specifically under my son's protection, and that demands an appropriate response." Around the table, Knight family captains nodded in solemn agreement, their eyes occasionally flickering to April with newfound respect, mixed with curiosity about her exact relationship with their future leader. The weight of their assessment felt tangible as April straightened her posture, refusing to appear intimidated. "We hit them where it hurts," Alec stated with cold precision, spreading maps across the table that detailed Pirelli holdings throughout Chicago, their shipping warehouse on the river, their money laundering front on Michigan Avenue, and their distribution center near the university, simultaneously, tomorrow night. As battle plans formed around her, April found herself unexpectedly contributing, her artist's memory recalling details from files she'd studied and conversations she'd overheard during her weeks in the night organization. Her suggestions for approach routes and timing drew appreciative nods from hardened criminals. When the meeting concluded, Dawn Knight lingered, his weathered hand resting briefly on April's shoulder in a gesture that felt like both approval and warning. "You've become valuable to this family, and particularly to my son," he observed, his eyes sharp despite his advanced age. "That makes you both an asset and a target." Left alone with Alec in the now empty conference room, April felt the enormity of her transformation, from waitress to critical piece on Chicago's criminal chessboard in less than a month. "This isn't what I thought my life would be," she admitted, tracing invisible patterns on the polished table surface. Alec approached slowly, as if giving her space to retreat, though they both knew she had nowhere else to go. "What did you think it would be?" he asked with genuine curiosity, perching on the edge of the table beside her chair, close enough that their knees almost touched. April laughed without humor, gesturing vaguely to the war plans still spread across the table. "Certainly not this. Planning coordinated strikes against rival crime families or being kidnapped in wine cellars," she replied, the absurdity of her situation suddenly striking her with full force. "Do you regret it?" Alec asked quietly, the question laden with more significance than its simple words suggested. He wasn't just asking about her choice to stay, but about everything that had developed between them in the weeks since that fateful night at Rosetta's. His vulnerability in that moment was startling. April considered the question seriously, reflecting on the fear, the danger, but also the exhilaration and sense of purpose she'd found in this new life, and the undeniable pull she felt toward the complicated man waiting for her answer. "No," she finally responded, meeting his gaze directly. "I don't regret any of it." The tension that had been building between them for weeks suddenly crystallized as Alec moved forward, pulling April to her feet and into his arms with decisive purpose. His kiss was neither gentle nor tentative. It was possessive, demanding, and thrillingly honest in its intensity as April responded with equal fervor. When they finally broke apart, breathless and slightly shocked by the force of their connection, Alec rested his forehead against hers with uncharacteristic tenderness. "I can't offer you normal, April," he warned, his hands framing her face as if memorizing its contours. "This life, my life, it will never be safe or predictable." "I stopped wanting normal the night I whispered that warning in your ear," April admitted, her fingers curling into the fabric of his shirt, as if anchoring herself to this new reality she'd chosen. "I'm not that person anymore. I'm whoever I need to be to survive in your world." The war against the Pirellis unfolded over the following week with the precision of a military campaign. Night forces striking strategic locations while April remained secured at the estate, her knowledge too valuable to risk in direct confrontation. She monitored operations remotely, providing insight based on patterns only she could detect. The night's surgical strikes against Pirelli Holdings disrupted their rivals' operations significantly, but Paul Pirelli responded with unexpected ruthlessness, targeting not just night business interests, but their allies and associates throughout Chicago. The escalation threatened to drag the entire city into open warfare, unless a resolution could be found. "They've sent a message," Dawn Knight announced grimly during an emergency council gathering. Security reports spread across the massive oak table that had hosted family meetings for 3 generations. Paul Pirelli has requested a formal sit-down with all 5 Chicago families as mediators. April watched the reactions ripple around the table. Disbelief, skepticism, calculation, as she maintained her newly established position at Alec's right hand, her presence no longer questioned by even the most traditional captains. The dynamics of power had shifted subtly but unmistakably in recent weeks. "It's another trap," Alec stated flatly, his fingers drumming a controlled rhythm on the polished wood as he exchanged a knowing look with April. "Just like Rosetta's, but with higher stakes and more potential casualties if things go wrong." Dawn Knight's weathered face revealed nothing as he studied his son and the young woman who had become his unexpected confidant and partner. "Perhaps," he acknowledged with a slight nod, "but refusing the meeting would make us appear weak to the other families. It would suggest fear." The silence that followed was heavy with unspoken implications. In their world, the appearance of weakness was often more dangerous than actual vulnerability. April felt the weight of multiple generations of violent history pressing down on the room, as all eyes turned to Alec for his decision. "There's a third option," April suggested quietly, speaking for the first time in the formal council setting, her artist's mind visualizing connections that others might miss. "We accept the meeting, but we control the terms completely, including the location." Interest flickered across Dawn Knight's features as he gestured for her to continue, the older man's respect evident in that simple acknowledgement of her right to propose strategy in this most critical of family discussions. Her integration into the inner circle was nearly complete. "Rosetta's," April stated simply, meeting the surprised expressions around the table with calm certainty. "We purchase it from the current owner, who I happen to know is eager to sell after the recent violence, and convert it into neutral territory that all families must respect." Alec's expression transformed from skepticism to thoughtful calculation as he considered the audacity of April's proposal. Territory that would technically belong to the Knights, but would serve as demilitarized ground for all Chicago business, he elaborated, building on her foundation. "The waitstaff would be our people, the security protocols our design, but all families would be guaranteed safe passage and equal treatment," April continued, warming to the concept as she outlined the details. "It becomes a symbol of both power and restraint, something the other families would respect." Dawn Knight's slow smile conveyed more approval than words could express as he rose from his chair, signaling his endorsement of the plan with the subtle authority that had maintained his position for decades. "Make the arrangements," he commanded before departing, leaving Alec and April to implement their joint strategy. Later that evening, As they stood on the now familiar balcony overlooking the lake, Alec pulled April against him with uncharacteristic gentleness, his usual controlled demeanor softened by private vulnerability. "You understand this world better than people who were born into it," he observed, genuine wonder in his voice. Rosetta's transformation happened with extraordinary efficiency, the night organization's resources enabling a complete security overhaul while maintaining the restaurant's elegant appearance. The private dining room was redesigned with subtle defensive features, escape routes carefully planned, and surveillance systems integrated invisibly into the decor. April supervised the hiring of new staff personally, selecting individuals with both service experience and security training, who could maintain the restaurant's reputation for excellence while providing an additional layer of protection. Her dual perspective as former waitress and night strategist proved invaluable during the preparations. 3 weeks after April's proposal, Rosetta's reopened with a private event exclusively for Chicago's 5 major crime families: the Knights, Pirellis, Romanos, Donovans, and Zanettis. Each permitted only the family head and 2 lieutenants. The air crackled with tension beneath the veneer of civilized dining. Paul Pirelli arrived last, his calculating gaze sweeping the transformed restaurant before settling on April with undisguised interest, as she stood beside Alec at the entrance, welcoming guests in her capacity as the establishment's new public face. His smile held no warmth as he approached them. "The waitress ascends," Paul remarked with mock admiration, his tone making the observation an insult, as he deliberately looked April up and down. From serving drinks to serving as Alec Knight's, what exactly? Advisor? Pet project? Or something more intimate? Before Alec could respond with the violent simmering just beneath his controlled exterior, April stepped forward with perfect poise, her smile professionally pleasant as she gestured toward the private dining room. "Tonight, I'm simply your hostess, Mr. Pirelli, ensuring that all parties have a productive discussion." The meeting progressed with ritualistic formality, each family head stating grievances and demands, while lieutenants observed intense silence, decades of complicated history underlying every carefully chosen word. Dawn Knight represented the family officially, though all eyes occasionally shifted to Alec as the heir apparent. April moved efficiently between kitchen and dining room, her presence seemingly that of an attentive manager, while her trained eye catalogued every subtle shift in alliances and tensions around the table. The other family's curiosity about her role was evident in their watchful glances as she circulated. "The Knights have violated territorial agreements by expanding operations into the West Side," Paul Pirelli declared during his formal statement, his accusation directed at Dawn Knight, while his eyes tracked April's movements around the perimeter of the room. "They've shown disrespect to established boundaries." Dawn Knight's response was measured, diplomatic, a stark contrast to the ruthlessness he was capable of when necessary. "The Knights have maintained the same territories for 15 years, he countered evenly, while the Pirellis have pushed eastward under new leadership without proper consultation. The negotiation continued with calculated proposals and counteroffers, but April noticed Paul Pirelli's security detail shifting subtly throughout the evening, positions adjusting in ways that didn't align with normal protective formations. A pattern emerged that triggered her instincts honed through weeks of training. When she caught Alec's eye across the room and discreetly touched her necklace, their established signal for detected threats, his imperceptible nod confirmed he'd observed the same concerning movements. With the slightest gesture, he alerted his father while maintaining the appearance of focused attention on the ongoing discussion. "Perhaps what's needed is a more permanent solution," Paul suggested with deliberate casualness as dessert was served, his fingers drumming against his water glass in what April recognized as a signal to his men. The old ways of division no longer serve Chicago's best interests. As servers presented the final course, April moved with practiced efficiency behind Paul Pirelli's chair, her actions smooth and natural as she leaned down to refill his water glass, using the movement to whisper directly into his ear, "I know about the snipers across the street and the men in the kitchen. This doesn't end well for you." The shock that flashed across Paul's face was quickly masked, but the momentary loss of control revealed the truth of April's assessment as she straightened, catching Alec's eye across the room with the slightest nod of confirmation. The trap was exposed before it could be sprung. Dawn Knight rose from his chair with the dignity of his position, addressing the assembled families with grave authority. "It appears some parties came tonight with intentions beyond negotiation," he stated, his tone making the accusation clear while avoiding direct confrontation that would shatter the fragile peace. What followed was a masterpiece of strategic maneuvering, as night security personnel emerged from seemingly innocuous positions throughout the restaurant, neutralizing Pirelli's hidden assets with silent efficiency while the formal dinner continued. The other family heads watched the invisible chess match unfold with wary calculation. By the time coffee was served, the balance of power had shifted irreversibly. Paul Pirelli's planned ambush dismantled piece by piece without a single shot fired, his humiliation complete, as he realized the extent to which his strategy had been anticipated and countered by the woman he had dismissed as merely a waitress. 3 months after the fateful dinner at Rosetta's, Chicago's underworld landscape had transformed dramatically, Paul Pirelli's failed ambush resulting in his removal as head of the family by his own uncle, who negotiated new territorial agreements with the Knights from a position of diminished power and grudging respect. Rosetta's flourished under its new management, becoming the neutral ground April had envisioned, a place where business could be conducted peacefully, disputes resolved without bloodshed, and the delicate ecosystem of Chicago's criminal hierarchy maintained with a stability unknown in previous decades. Her vision had materialized into reality. Don Knight announced his semi-retirement at a private gathering of family captains, officially naming Alec as his successor, while creating a new advisory position that recognized April's unique contributions to the organization. The old guard's acceptance of this unprecedented structure was testament to how thoroughly she had proven her value. "You've changed everything," Alec observed one evening as they walked along the lakefront path near the Knight estate, the spring air carrying the promise of renewal after Chicago's harsh winter. "Not just for me or for the family, but for how business operates throughout the city." April considered this assessment, still sometimes surprised by how completely her life had transformed since that night when she'd whispered a desperate warning to a dangerous stranger. "I just applied different perspectives to old problems," she replied modestly, though she recognized the truth in his words. The Knight organization itself had evolved under their joint influence, violence reduced to a last resort rather than standard procedure, intelligent strategy replacing brute force, and previously untapped revenue streams developed through April's innovative approaches to legitimate business fronts. Their partnership had proven unexpectedly revolutionary. "My father wants us to make it official," Alec said suddenly, stopping to face her fully as the setting sun cast golden light across the water beyond them. "He believes our partnership should be formalized in ways that even the most traditional elements of the family would recognize and respect." April raised an eyebrow, amusement playing at the corners of her mouth, despite the seriousness of the conversation. "Is Don Knight suggesting a merger between organizations, or is this a more personal proposal?" she asked, her direct approach one of the qualities Alec had come to value most. Alec's laugh was genuine, a sound that had become more frequent in recent months, as the hardened exterior he'd maintained for years softened slightly under April's influence. "Both, actually," he admitted, reaching into his pocket to withdraw a small velvet box with deliberate casualness. Inside nestled a stunning emerald ring surrounded by diamonds. Not a traditional engagement piece, but something as unique as their relationship, the deep green stone reminiscent of April's eyes in certain lights. "This belonged to my grandmother, who my father says was the only person who ever successfully managed his father." April's artist's eye appreciated the vintage setting and unusual stone choice, but it was the significance behind the offering that truly affected her. This wasn't merely a proposal, but an acknowledgement of her equal standing in a world where power was rarely shared willingly. "Quite the family tradition you're continuing. I'm not asking you to be merely my wife," Alec clarified, his expression serious despite the lightness of their exchange. "I'm asking you to continue being my partner in everything, to build something that lasts beyond either of us, something better than what came before." April considered how far she had come from the struggling art student waiting tables to pay tuition, the skills she'd developed, the confidence she'd gained, and the unexpected purpose she'd found in reshaping an organization most would have deemed unredeemable. The choice before her now felt inevitable rather than impossible. "Yes," she answered simply, allowing Alec to slide the ring onto her finger with the same careful precision he applied to everything meaningful in his life. The weight of the jewelry felt right somehow, a physical manifestation of the responsibility she had chosen to accept months ago with that first whispered warning. The wedding that followed weeks later was attended by representatives from all 5 Chicago families, a visible demonstration of the new order April and Alec had established together. The previous generation's patterns of endless feuds and retribution giving way to calculated cooperation that benefited all parties. Rosetta's hosted the reception, the restaurant's elegant atmosphere providing the perfect backdrop for this merging of April's past life with her present reality. The staff, now loyal night employees with specialized training, served the gathered criminals and legitimate business figures with equal efficiency. As April and Alec moved among their guests, accepting congratulations from both allies and former adversaries, she caught sight of Don Knight watching them from across the room with unmistakable approval. The old man raised his glass in silent acknowledgement of what they had accomplished together, a transformation none could have predicted. "From waitress to the most powerful woman in Chicago," Alec murmured against her ear, as they paused near the spot where she had once delivered that fateful warning that had changed both their lives irrevocably. "All because you chose to speak when others would have remained silent." April smiled, thinking of the frightened young woman she had been, and the confident strategist she had become through necessity, opportunity, and her own determination. "I prefer to think of it as finding my true calling," she replied, her hand fitting perfectly within his as they faced their future together. Thank you all for following this story. If you've enjoyed it, please write in the comments where you're watching from. And don't forget to like, subscribe, and share the video, because your support is what keeps me creating content like this. Until next time.